He thought he was just slapping an old man in a coffee shop, but that entitled act of aggression against a quiet veteran would shatter his entire life. The familiar aroma of dark roast coffee and toasted bagels was my sanctuary. Every morning, 7:30 a.m., same table in the corner of the daily grind. It was a small ritual that grounded my retirement. Me, a fresh cup of black coffee, the daily crossword, and the quiet hum of a city waking up. For a man who'd spent 30 years in the army, from the humid jungles of Panama to the arid deserts of Iraq, this simple peace was a treasure more valuable than any medal. My old bones ached some days, and my hair was more salt than pepper, but my mind was sharp, and my gaze was steady. I liked it that way. Simple. Uncomplicated. That morning, the peace was shattered by a voice that sounded like a blender full of gravel and entitlement. He barged in, shouting into a Bluetooth earpiece, dressed in a suit that cost more than my first car but fit him like a cheap rental. He was one of those guys, the kind who believed the world was their personal boardroom and everyone else was an unpaid intern. He scanned the crowded cafe, his eyes landing on my 4-person table. I was the only one sitting there, my newspaper and jacket occupying the other chairs. A perfect target. He strutted over, not even bothering to end his call. "Yeah, just liquidate the assets. I don't care about the optics. Just get it done," he barked into his earpiece before snapping it off and fixing his glare on me. "Hey, I need this table." It wasn't a request. It was a declaration. I slowly looked up from my crossword puzzle, peering at him over the top of my reading glasses. "Good morning to you too," I said, my voice calm and even. "There are a couple of two-seaters by the window." He scoffed, a nasty, sharp sound. "I'm not sitting at a dollhouse table. I have a meeting. You're one person. Move." I took a slow sip of my coffee, letting the warmth spread through my chest. The younger me, the staff sergeant with a short fuse, would have handled this differently. But I was 68 years old. I was tired of conflict. "I'm quite comfortable here, son. I'm sure your meeting partners will understand." His face, already a blotchy pink, began to darken. "Did you hear me, old man? I said move. Or are you deaf as well as useless?" A few people at nearby tables started to look over. The young barista behind the counter looked nervous. I folded my newspaper deliberately, placing it on the table. "There's no need for that kind of talk. This is a public place." "Oh, I see," he sneered, leaning down, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that was louder than a normal person's shout. "It's one of you people, thinking you're owed something. You get a little pension and suddenly you think you own the place. You people." There it was. The old familiar poison. It didn't sting like it used to. Mostly it just made me feel tired. I've been called worse by men holding weapons, not lattes. I simply looked at him, my expression unreadable. My silence, my refusal to be baited, seemed to infuriate him more than any insult I could have thrown back. "What, nothing to say now?" he spat, his face inches from mine. "Get up! Now!" I didn't move a muscle. I just held his gaze. No. The word hung in the air, small but solid. It was a period at the end of a sentence he wasn't used to hearing. His entire body tensed, his jaw worked, and for a second I thought he might actually combust from sheer rage. And then his hand came up. It moved in a blur, a flash of pale skin and expensive cufflink. The sound it made when it connected with my cheek was like a whip crack in the suddenly silent cafe. The slap wasn't hard enough to knock me over, but it was hard enough to sting, hard enough to rock my head to the side, hard enough to make every single person in the room gasp. For a moment, all I could feel was the sharp, burning sensation on my skin and a profound sense of disbelief. He had actually struck me, a 68-year-old man, a veteran, in the middle of a coffee shop. He stood there, panting slightly, a triumphant, ugly smirk on his face. "See? That's how you get things done. Should have just moved when I told you to." I slowly turned my head back to face him. The fire was there, deep down. The cold, controlled rage I had learned to master on a dozen battlefields. It rose in my chest, a familiar, chilling friend. But I didn't let it show on my face. Instead, A slow, cold smile touched my lips. My eyes, I knew, had changed. The warm, grandfatherly twinkle was gone, replaced by something flat and hard, like polished granite. He saw it. His smirk faltered for a fraction of a second. He saw that he hadn't slapped a feeble old man. He'd slapped something else entirely. "You are going to regret that," I said, my voice barely a whisper, yet it cut through the silence like a razor. He didn't know it yet, but he had just ended his life as he knew it. I reached into my coat pocket, my movements calm and deliberate, and pulled out my phone. I ignored the gasps and the whispers around me. My focus was singular. I found the contact I needed, the one labeled simply Eagle 1. My thumb hovered over the call button. He thought this was over. It was just beginning. The bully, let's call him Mr. Suit, actually chuckled. It was a wet, condescending sound. "Who you calling, Pops? The police? You think they're gonna do anything? I'll have their captain shining my shoes by noon." He gestured around the silent cafe. "I have witnesses that an unstable old man got aggressive. Self-defense." I ignored him and pressed the call button. It rang only once before a crisp, professional voice answered. No hello, no greeting. Just, "Go for Eagle 1. My voice was low, but every syllable was clear. "Eagle Base, this is Sentinel. I have a situation." I paused, looking directly into Mr. Suit's smug face. "Code, uncivil response. Location, the Daily Grind. Corner of 4th and Elm. Hostile is contained, but uncooperative." There was a beat of silence on the other end, the kind of silence that's filled with rapid-fire thought and immediate action. Mr. Suit was still smirking, thinking this was all some kind of dementia-fueled fantasy. "Understood, Sentinel," the voice came back, devoid of all emotion except for a chilling efficiency. "Is your position compromised?" "Negative," I said. "Just messy. A cleanup crew would be appreciated." "Copy that. Asset deployment is immediate. Hold your position. ETA 4 mics. Eagle 1 out." The line went dead. I lowered the phone and placed it back on the table, next to my half-finished crossword. I picked up my pen. A 5-letter word for hubris, I thought. FOOL. Mr. Suit's smirk had finally vanished, replaced by a look of genuine confusion. "What was that? Some kind of prank call? Are your veteran buddies going to show up in their VFW hats to scare me?" He took a step forward, puffing out his chest. "I don't know what game you think you're playing, but I'm about to—" He reached for my arm. Big mistake. It was pure instinct, a response honed over decades. I didn't move my body. I didn't even stand up. I simply shifted my weight, pivoted my wrist, and met his grasping hand with my own. My thumb found the nerve cluster just below his knuckles, and my fingers wrapped around his wrist. I applied a gentle, precise pressure. A strangled yelp escaped his lips. His eyes went wide with shock and pain. His multi-thousand-dollar suit couldn't protect him from the simple, brutal reality of anatomy. He tried to pull back, but he was locked in place. He was a bull, and I had him by the nose ring. "You need to learn some manners," I said, my voice still conversational. "The first lesson is you don't put your hands on people without their permission." But I held him there for a few seconds, letting the lesson sink in. He was breathing hard, sweat beading on his forehead. The alpha male act had crumbled, replaced by the primal fear of a man who had completely, utterly misjudged his opponent. I released him as suddenly as I had grabbed him. He stumbled back, clutching his hand, his face a mask of disbelief and agony. I took another sip of my coffee. It was getting cold. The entire cafe was watching, a captive audience to a one-act play they didn't understand. The young barista looked like she was about to faint. You broke my hand," Mr. Suit stammered, his voice trembling. "No, I didn't," I replied calmly, not looking up from my crossword. "If I had broken it, you'd be unconscious. I was just educating you. Consider it a free consultation." Outside, the normal city sounds of traffic and sirens seemed to fade. A new sound was emerging, or rather a lack of it. A strange, expectant quiet began to settle over the street. It was then that the first car appeared. A black, unmarked sedan with tinted windows. It didn't park. It just stopped. dead in the middle of the street, blocking a lane of traffic. A moment later, another one pulled up behind it, then a third across the street. No one honked, no one dared. Men in dark, practical suits began to emerge. They didn't have the swagger of cops or the bulk of bodyguards. They moved with a fluid, predatory grace. They wore earpieces. Their eyes were constantly scanning rooflines, windows, alleyways. One of them spoke quietly into his wrist. Mr. Suit saw them. His jaw went slack. His pale face went sheet white. He looked from the men outside to me, sitting calmly at my table. The impossible truth was beginning to dawn on him, a horrifying sunrise of his own making. The little bell above the coffee shop door chimed. The conversations, the whispers, every sound ceased. A tall man in a perfectly tailored suit stepped inside. He had a military posture and eyes that looked like they could see your soul and judge it unworthy. He didn't look at the cowering bully. He didn't look at the terrified barista. His gaze swept the room and landed directly on me. He gave a short, almost imperceptible nod. Then his eyes shifted, cold and analytical, and settled on the man who had slapped me. He took a step forward, and his voice was flat, devoid of mercy. "Sir," he said to Mr. Suit, "my name is Agent Thorne. We need you to come with us, now." Mr. Suit stared at Agent Thorne, his fear momentarily eclipsed by his ingrained arrogance. "Come with you. Do you have any idea who I am? My lawyer will have your badge for this. This is harassment." Thorne didn't even blink. He took a small step closer, his presence seeming to suck the very air out of the room. "Your name is Richard Sterling, CEO of Sterling Acquisitions. We know who you are. The more important question, Mr. Sterling, is do you know who you just assaulted?" "Some nobody," Sterling spat, gesturing wildly at me. "An old man who wouldn't get out of my way?" "No," Thorne said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous tone. "You just committed assault and battery against James Carter. And while that alone would be enough to ruin your day, the problem for you is that Mr. Carter is a Tier 1 protected individual under federal mandate 7-4 Alpha, which means you didn't just assault a citizen, you assaulted a national asset." Sterling's face went from white to a sickly shade of gray. "National asset? What are you talking about? He's just some old—" "He is Sentinel," Thorne interrupted, the code name landing like a hammer blow. 30 years decorated service, Army Special Operations, recipient of the Distinguished Service Cross, and for the last 6 years a senior strategic advisor on domestic threats, an advisor whose counsel is sought by the highest levels of our government. Thorne paused, letting the information sink in. "When he made that call, Mr. Sterling, it initiated a protocol that assumes any threat against him is a potential threat to national security." The bully's knees looked weak. He leaned against a nearby table for support. "This is insane. For a slap? You're doing all this for a slap?" "The slap was merely the catalyst," Thorne continued, his voice utterly devoid of sympathy. "The uncivil response code you triggered doesn't just address the immediate incident. It authorizes a full, multi-agency review of the aggressor. We want to know why someone like you felt so comfortable assaulting a stranger in public. What else are you comfortable doing?" He glanced at a tablet held by another agent. "As we speak, teams from the IRS and the SEC are executing warrants at your office and your home. Financial forensics is already digging into Sterling Acquisitions. A preliminary flag from the Treasury Department suggests a pattern of significant offshore wire transfers that don't quite align with your declared income. You see, Mr. Sterling, we find that bullies who act like this in coffee shops often act like this in boardrooms. They cut corners. They break laws. They think the rules don't apply to them." Sterling began to hyperventilate. His empire, his entire world, was being dismantled in real time because he couldn't wait for a table. 2 other agents moved to flank him, their hands resting lightly on his arms. He didn't resist. All the fight had drained out of him, replaced by the chilling, absolute certainty of ruin. As they guided him towards the door, he looked back at me one last time. There was no anger in his eyes now, only a desperate, pleading terror. I just looked back, my expression unchanged, and took another sip of my coffee. With Sterling gone, Agent Thorne walked over to my table. The professional mask softened ever so slightly. "Are you all right, sir?" I'm fine, David, I said, using his first name. A little more excitement than I prefer before 8 a.m. He allowed a small, tight smile. The secretary was concerned. He's on a flight to Brussels, but he was patched through the moment the alert came in. He wanted me to convey his regards. There it was, the final piece of the puzzle for anyone in the cafe still trying to connect the dots. My son, Eagle One, the man at the very top of Homeland Security. A man who had built a system to protect his country, and on a smaller, more personal level, to protect his old man from a world that had grown increasingly uncivil. Tell him I'm fine, and to focus on the threat matrix in Europe, I said. And David? Take care of the barista. She looks terrified. And maybe cover everyone's tab. No need to ruin their morning, too. Of course, Mr. Carter, Thorne said with a nod. He and his team melted away as discreetly as they had arrived, leaving a stunned but profoundly grateful coffee shop in their wake. The next morning I returned at my usual time. The aroma of dark roast coffee was a comfort. I walked to my corner table. On it sat a fresh cup of black coffee and a bagel, waiting for me. The young barista caught my eye from behind the counter and gave me a warm, genuine smile. It's on the house today, Mr. Carter. I nodded my thanks, opened my newspaper, and settled into my routine. The cafe was quiet, peaceful. My sanctuary was restored. I didn't take any pleasure in what happened to Richard Sterling, but I knew that sometimes the only way to teach a bully a lesson is to introduce him to a power so far beyond his comprehension that he finally understands how small he truly is. And for some men, the only language they truly understand is consequence.